Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zach Riera. I'm Deloitte's payment practice leader. I'm joined today by Jessica Cheney from Bottomline, Jim Colasano from the Clearinghouse, Ulrike Gigi from Wells Fargo, and Tim Root from Fiserv. Today we're going to take a collective look at the real-time payments journey over the past 5 years and really talk about how RTP has matured over this time. Where are we and where we're headed? When we think about real-time payments, we really have seen it in a couple of ways. The first wave was really the sort of foundational aspects of it. We started with the Faster Payments Task Force. The Clearinghouse released the RTP network, which created secure real-time payments infrastructure for financial institutions. Where we are today is wave 2. We've started to move from sort of the initial use cases to really thinking about broader sets of transactions that can be supported through RTP. We see many of the largest financial institutions being adopters and users of the Clearinghouse's RTP network. PayPal and /Venmo through its banking partners does a lot of its volume now through RTP as an example. We all know that with Zelle as well. And we're fundamentally starting to see additional aspects that enable it to scale. The increase in limits, for instance, in April, as well as now the release of request for payment. But now let's talk about the third wave and where we think that can entail, which really we believe is going to be about the move towards ubiquity. What that could look like, things like cross-border payments, interoperability between the TCH network and FedNow, the influence of perhaps open banking to enable more individuals and more businesses to get access to real-time payments functionality. What we do know is it's going to require help from the entire ecosystem, everyone from the network operators of real-time payments to financial institutions, to the technology companies that enable financial institutions and enable companies to be able to access and use RTP functionality. So today's conversation is really going to start with current state of play. Where are we now and what have we learned? We're then going to dive into some of the various aspects of innovation, what's going to be needed and what's going to help propel RTP towards that ubiquity. We'll talk about some of the challenges that exist across the ecosystem, and then we'll take a look into the future and see what we think is going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months or so from now. So panelists, thank you very much for joining me, and let's go ahead and get started. Jim, we'll start with you. RTP launched in 2017, really the first new core payments infrastructure we've had in the U.S. in 40 years. Maybe give us a sense about the journey so far in terms of usage, adoption, sort of success stories, and sort of things that you're hearing from the TCH perspective.
Sure, Zach. In order to kind of talk about the journey, I want to go back to where we started in 2017. When we launched in November of 2017, we had 7 banks on the network. I think our grand total of activity that first month was 50 transactions, if memory serves. And here we are several years later, and now we have upwards of 270 banks on the network. It is a mix of our TCH owner banks, as well as community banks, credit unions, banks of all types that are on the network today. All of the banks that are on the network are receiving transactions, so the minute they come on the network, they're able to receive transactions, their customers are able to get them and see that real-time experience. And right now we have about 32 banks who are originating transactions into the network, and that number is increasing. When we start to take a look at where we are from a volume perspective, the last quarter we processed about 43 million transactions on the network for about $18 billion. We see that growing about 10% a quarter. We're on track to hit, I think, 46 to 48 million this quarter. So we're growing at a pretty nice clip. When we start to take a look at the use cases, one of the things that when we started, we were looking for the big killer use case that everybody was going to start using. And when PayPal joined the network, and we started to see their wallet defunding activity, which was a large portion of activity on the network, everybody was really happy. But what we really wanted was a diversification around it. We wanted to see lots of different use cases. We didn't see a lot of B2B activity at the time. So we started asking businesses, why aren't you using real-time payments for B2B? And they said, well, we'd love to, but the dollar limits are too small. We started at 25,000. So we raised it to $1 million earlier this year. We're looking to continue to increase that individual limit. And just a couple of tidbits in terms of where we are now. This last, I think it was June or July, we're starting to track another metric, which is the number of discrete originators on the network. And during the month of June, we had 110,000 discrete business-to-business originators on the network, and over 2 million discrete consumer originators on the network. And the nice thing about that is you see use cases across the spectrum nowadays. So lots of different applications, payroll applications are big, earned wage access, payment on demand for gig economy payroll. We are still seeing wallet defunding as a big application. We are seeing settlement transactions, net settlement transactions for acquiring business. So we're seeing a lot. And the nice thing about it is all of these applications are solving particular pain points. And we continue to see the use cases grow and the volume grow. And what we're trying to do is to make sure we're seeing both. And that's kind of where we are at this inflection point in the network.
Nice. Ulrike, let's move to you. Wells Fargo has been a very big advocate of RTP. Maybe tell us a little bit more about your customers and some of the benefits that they've received from RTP.
Yeah, sure. So even prior to Wells, I was with the same company that Zach represents now, and we helped the Fed stand up the Faster Payments Task Force. So since 2015, we've really been involved in that topic, and I think what the clearinghouse has launched and really being the one to emerge out of that, the recommendations of the task force with a product that met all the specifications that were put up for faster payments, is really quite an accomplishment. So I think the clearinghouse deserves a lot of credit here, and now the Fed themselves, and we're joined by some of them in the room, will come in with another similar product. So why was it so important? Well, as you said, there hasn't been a new payment system in the US, and the payments infrastructure really is quite antiquated. But also our customer needs really were not being met by the existing products. When you think about ACH, even same-day ACH has a settlement risk. There's also, of course, the loss of liquidity, and for the end consumer, very hard to understand. I deposited my check and I see my funds 3 days later. Where were those funds? So I just sold my shares on my Vanguard account, and why doesn't that hit my DDA until 3 or 5 days later? So really the instant payments would have been so prominent around the rest of the world, just haven't made it here yet. So I think there's definitely, it's a product that meets a lot of consumer needs, and we with 70 million customers across retail, small business banking, commercial banking, investment banking, there are just needs for that kind of application all across the use case spectrum. So we've been enthusiastic supporters since day one. We're very engaged now with the next generation of where this is going. And just in Q2, if I compare year over year, our send volume has increased by 4x. So I really see that the adoption is coming, and it's an exciting time because eventually I think RTP has the potential to replace ACH, wires, and checks, and everybody will be better off for it.
It's hearing the stories about the amazing growth, that also talks about the ability for companies to be able to access payment services, and Jessica, Bottomline, has been a leading provider in providing that technology. Specific to RTP and enabling some of that functionality, what are some of the success stories that you've seen from your perspective?
First of all, the general success story I think that we have is that right now 25% of our banks are supporting that's just a milestone that we achieved that we were really happy to see. Now, we had some of the earliest adopters back in 2017 on there, so we've learned a lot too. I think some of the use cases that came out of that were unique, these were both pandemic driven, but doing loan disbursements for PPP loans. And then Jim mentioned this one too, instant payroll has really become a use case that had its genesis in the pandemic, but has really turned to being much more of a specific business process enabler, which is really where I think some of these success stories are going to come from. We have, in addition to that 25% of our customer base, we're now seeing that second wave of banks being interested. They're either coming out of the pandemic, the disfocus that the pandemic caused and delaying those, or they just have a renewed interest in it. Along with renewed interest, something we're really excited about is we have 2 banks about to go live with RFP. Of course, when I spoke to them about coming here, they said, you need to make sure that you tell everybody we need more banks to accept RFP. So I did my public service announcement for them. I think that you asked me for success stories. I think that one thing that overwhelmingly our customers tell us is adoption's slow but steady. And we're happy to see it just be slow and steady at this point. They're relooking at what they've done for training and enablement of their customers so that their customers can find the right use case to find the value in using RTP over an established payment system at this point. So I really think that RFP piece of this, as we're going to talk about later, probably may be that next level of impetus and push that the industry needs.
So when I hear you talk about, I have 2 institutions that want to send, I need some that say receive. I now think about banks that have to work together, and Tim, that naturally leads me over to you. And thinking about, right, some of the things that now you've enabled banks to be able to access RTP through Fiserv's now Gateway. What are some of the things that, maybe mirroring what you've heard from just the same, like you hear from your customers, from financial institutions in terms of what they're asking for regarding RTP and how you and Fiserv have been working to adapt and support those requests?
Yeah, great. There are some familiar themes. And we're fortunate we get to talk to a lot of different financial institutions on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, right? We have several thousand FIs that use our payment services. And we now have about 1,000 live on some form of real-time. Not, RTP is the one that's coming in the next wave. A lot of them got their taste with real-time customer experiences, at least with Zelle. And the one thing it did is sort of cement a perception that there's real customer value there, right? So where we are today, we have several thousand clients, and total we have 270 on RTP, and so that's the big ubiquity gap we need to close. And so we're having a lot of conversations that they say, okay, I get it, I've done some real time on Zelle or haven't, but I think I want to get on this clearinghouse RTP train. But tell me why and how I should get started and what's the progression, and I'm a little intimidated that I can't do it all at once. And so we usually start with a discussion around the customer journey, and one of the things we know is that if we've done a lot of customer research too, and we published some papers with Javelin that covers a lot of this, but it's like the number one use case for an end user, especially consumers, is they want to get paid faster. Right? So the first thing out of the gate, hey, get on board, start receiving payments. That's a no regret move. Your customers get benefit. You don't have to do as much fraud and risk. Get started, right? And from there, let's talk through the other things you might want to do with it, because you can't do it all at once, right? Whether it's, you want to do payables or interbank transfers or bill pay. I mean, you have to think through your progression and do some planning. So get enabled, do some planning, and then try to take a platform approach, right? Which is, once you've thought about the plan, how do you implement in such a way that you can turn on the next service and the next service? Anticipate a little bit so you don't have to do rework. So that's really, the dialogue we're having with clients. And there really is no benefit in waiting. So we're trying to, show them that there's real transactions out there right now to give their customers that kind of moment of delight.
So really good stories about where we stand, hearing a lot about a lot of adoption, a lot of interest, even desire for more interest. Some discussion around pace of adoption and how that works and how that needs to be enabled. I kind of want to pivot a little bit to sort of how we continue then to drive adoption and drive usage. And Ulrike, I think about our conversations over the years about I think it's a little bit trying to say digitization of payments, because payments have been digital for a very long time, but truly what we're seeing is a remaking, and I think some of it is there's a journey, as Tim's alluded to, and I think there's a larger context around how we think about reimagining payments. So sort of what's your perspective on how RTP fits into kind of that larger context?
Yeah, I think digitization and transformation of payments is a journey. It's not really a one-time event. And as I referenced before, it is a journey that we are late on embarking here compared to some other Western countries, but even a lot of emerging economies where they have moved towards real-time payments, for example, in India, which is now the main form of consumer payments there. So the modernization train has arrived and we're on it. But it's not just RTP. RTP is just one building block. There are others, for example, ISO 20022, which is the new messaging standard that the RTP and also FedNow payments will use, that allows you much richer data formats to be sent along, and you can even, if you don't know this, but you can even attach a PDF. So think about what a great payment experience that is. The payment is instant, and now you get this information thanks to this new messaging standard allows you to receive this information and makes it much easier to reconcile your invoices and so forth. So ISO 20022 is another, I would say, is another brick in that building. And then there's the whole front end of the customer experience, and I think that's where the fintechs have really, taken the lead and shown us how to do this. Which is, you don't just want the plumbing to be better, which is really what payment systems are, but also the entry points, the touch points. And when I think about open banking and what is happening there and the instant connectivity between bank accounts, I think that is another building block really to the modernization of the payment system. The payment system is no longer in the hands of the banks and the processors. There are now many other endpoints that have entered that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because you bring up ISO 20022. Made me think back that we've been having some variant of this conversation around data for, I think, as long as you and I have been thinking about payments, so 20, 25 years when we were both 8, 9 years old. We don't change much. But we always talk about with level 3 data on P cards, we will solve all sorts of B2B problems. And now we're talking about more formats. I think about the panel that happened earlier today, and one of the folks from, I believe she was from Synchrony, talked about having 7 trillion data points out there on customers. So tons of data. We've talked a lot about data that's going to be needed, and it makes me think a lot about sort of what we talk about around value-add solutions. And Jessica, I wanted to get your perspective on what are the, as we think about, okay, we're again continuing to improve access to data, more data points, et cetera. How do we best actually employ and use these kind of services to achieve kind of the benefit that Ulrike is talking about?
I think it really comes down to, and I'll give you a story based off of where we sit in this ecosystem. Bottomline provides what we refer to as the customer engagement solution, or the end user component of this. We really, really focus on the customer experience. So because of that, our value-added services tend to be focused not just on the payment rail, the payment, or the speed of the payment, but things that can go and be used around that payment. And RTP is one of the perfect case studies for this. We talk about how the value proposition is supported by the increased use of the ancillary messages to provide digital communication between an AP and an AR department. My company has just gotten awarded a patent because of the way that we are bringing that through our UI and utilizing, and this is an overused term, but this is how we refer to it, as conversational payments in this regard. It also, we point out that you've got, because of that digital communication, you also have digital record keeping of something that has never been digital in that manner before. If you've ever looked at how an AP clerk works, you know, those people should have stock and 3M and sticky notes, right? So, but this kind of takes that away and puts it into a digital electronic record and audit of that back and forth communication. We've also, and I mentioned this before, the other thing that we started to focus on is highlighting end-to-end workflows that are in support of business processes. And we talked about instant payroll being one. I think the other is really highlighted by the overlay service that is RFP. You know, you have RFP that is a tool that really is focused on increasing liquidity on both sides of the spectrum. It's also a lot of people don't think about it or talk about it this way. It's a little bit of a security tool, right? You're asking for a payment within a secure channel, and the person who receives that RFP should not only be responding to that with a credit push, by the way, not a debit, but to people that they're expecting to get a request for payment from. They can also use that tool to manage their liquidity. So that really that end-to-end business flow is how those ancillary services that happen to go around the ISO 2002 message set of the payment really needs to be talked about. And we start talking about it in those terms, that's when our business customers are finally going to get the value of them versus, you know, when I had to actually explain what real-time payments were to our new CFO at Bottomline, he said, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Why would I want to pay faster? I'm like, no, you're not looking at this the right way. So obviously after I explained that, but it tells you that conversation right there just gives you a view into how a lot of corporates think about RTP. We have to change that.
And I think, you know, therefore maybe continuing that part of the dialogue, Tim, then when we think financial institution side, there's a lot that has to then be enabled. And it's more than just, if you will, you know, you're ready to go on real-time payments, you want to be able to enable the ability to then support a lot of these value-added services. As we think about sort of your comment around adding to adoption, and you hear sort of the comments that Ulrike and Jessica are making, what are the things that you think on your end need to be done to sort of enable RTP to be adopted with these and enable some of this additional value?
Yeah, great question. I think the best thing we can do, and it is a form of innovation, which is sort of the theme here, which is simplify. Right? If you look at a lot of great innovations, I mean, you look at the iPhone, right? There's a lot of simplification and ease. And the simpler and easier we can make this to consume, implement, integrate, the better off we're all going to be, right? So we look at that across several different dimensions. One is how we integrate to core so we can do real-time posting. You know, another is what is that user experience? How can we make this simple to the user? How can we fold it into their existing patterns, right? Rather than just creating this standalone thing, go make a real-time payment. I mean, fold it into how they're doing some other behavior, whether it's a payable or a receivable or a transfer or payment. Fold it in, simplify it for them so it's part of their natural behavior. Fraud and risk, right? So we get a lot of questions about fraud and risk, right? How do I manage fraud and risk now that the money can move faster? Well, I think you've got a lot of great tools in place, and you need to just one of the things you need to do is take a look at that and say, all right, what else do I need to do? I mean, there's a lot of smarts in the fraud and risk tools. A lot of them are very application sensitive. So how do you enhance that? And, you know, so our whole mantra is how do we make this easy for financial institutions and billers. We got a lot of billers, a lot of merchants. It's not a merchant thing yet, really, other than disbursements. But how do we make it easy for them with turnkey solutions that sits in seamlessly with a lot of the things they're already doing?
And I think what you all are also driving at is the more that we have to explain everything, the harder it gets, which means we have to show that these things can be done easily, that they can actually be embedded into the product and the service, so such that you're not explaining to every single CFO or other person that says, but don't I get paid right away, or why would I want to give out money faster? It really needs to be about how they're trying to accomplish things that they want to do today.
It
That
should
are
be
just
a
not
natural extension of what they're doing, and that creates this little moment of delight going, whoa, that's awesome, happened fast. Right?
Exactly. And so I think of then, Jim, maybe over to you though, is as a network operator, right, how do you think about enabling all of, sort of this type of innovation to happen? Knowing that, when we talk about some of these examples, one aspect is, okay, that makes life easier, but the other aspect is, okay, how can I do that, one, at scale, but also in a secure way as well?
Thanks, and I'll also say one of the things that we learned very early on is the hardest thing in the world is figuring out the way to make something really simple and really easy. And we did a lot of work. We learned a lot very early on from what we thought and how we thought the system was going to work and how people actually started using it. And one of the interesting things about the early days of the program was we were all learning together. I've been in banking for a long time, a lot on the banking side. And to put 5, 10, 15 competitor banks in a room and have a productive conversation is nothing I thought I would ever see in my lifetime. But we did with RTP. We learned, we built, we grew, and people shared. They shared their experiences. They talked about what worked, what didn't work. And we built a library of lessons learned. We took that into the experiences, right? Because what we realized was with customers, one, they do need to be educated, and there's a difference between education and constantly having to explain something to people. And what we realized is when new banks came on board, the one thing that we told every new bank was you start by educating as many people within your organization as you possibly can. Because once you understand the value proposition, once you understand how this is not a traditional payment rail, then you can start to think of using it in ways that you wouldn't have thought of using things in the past. And we did that with a lot of our work. We have a group in TCH that's just focused on innovation, right? They're just looking at different ways that we can provide services and overlays and different capabilities that really focuses on end user experience and how the RTP network can enable that. The bill pay program that uses RFP is a perfect example. We got 7 banks together to design a reimagined bill pay experience. Now think about that for a second, right? And we're going to be launching that using the RFP. And the feedback that we've received from billers and consumers has been, we've been waiting for this, right? Once they understand what's happening. And I'll add to Jessica's comment that if you are going to be receiving requests for payment into your retail environments, do it as quickly as you possibly can. The more banks we have receiving requests for payments and delivering them to their consumers, the growth of it will be explosive and open up even more use cases that you haven't thought about yet. We talked about payroll, and one of my favorite examples is paying something early means I've got to get the money. So using RFP to get immediate funds into the payroll provider's hands so that they can then turn around and make those payments on a regular basis as the customers are demanding it. Is another natural extension of the RFP experience. So the education becomes a big piece of it, and the collaboration becomes a big piece of it in terms of building this stuff.
Yeah, love the highlight on collaboration, and I think, right, the other aspect too, we've talked a lot about payroll, is it's enabling individuals to live their lives the way that they want to live them, right? Spend the money the way that they want to be able to spend it when they want to be able to. And being able to enable that, huge outsized value. But, you know, again, there's some challenges here, and I think, you know, one of which is, as you said, the value is a little different. And, you know, we see this with our clients all the time of, well, what's my business case to do this? And if everybody's doing it, am I going to cannibalize my revenue? You know, don't we already offer ways for people to make payments, et cetera? And so I think when we think about it, to your point, the business case has to be thought of a little bit differently. And, you know, Ulrike, I think about some of your comments that you've made around, you know, it's not a should I, it's a must, et cetera. So how do you know, given the advances that Wells Fargo's made in the journey, what are some of the challenges you experience trying to, you know, kind of get that buy-in in making that business case for RTP?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, we have very impressive numbers of transactions we send through the RTP network, but the getting every line of business on board, and I think to your point, educating everybody is really no walk in the park, because on the surface, you look at the pricing from the clearinghouse and you say, gee, right now for a wire I can charge $40 and that's just 20 pennies. Why would I do that? Well, the point is think further. I mean, price for the value. And let me tell you something, it's now $1 million is the transaction limit. Think about retail wires. I recently bought a house. And it was some podunk closing agent in the middle of nowhere. And then that payment went to like 5 hops to get to his bank account. I didn't know where it was. I mean, an instant payment, I would have paid $45, I'm sure. You know, so the banks, I think, first of all, going in with this pricing assumption, just because it's priced similarly to ACH now or in that lives in that world, that does not mean that that's the value. So we need to price for the value. And I think you see that with those providers who enable Uber or other Uber drivers or other gig workers to get their paycheck on the same day, they can charge 1% for that. So I think pricing, we just need to think more broadly. I think the other aspects of the business case so that are holding back some of the adoption are really the fact that you need to have the investment in the infrastructure to be there 24/7 and 365 days a week, because guess what, it's a real-time payment. That means you cannot just go home on Saturday and Sunday and say, I'll do that real-time Monday morning. And you'd be surprised by the conversations we've even had, like, let's send it over RTP in a batch file. Well, why would we do that? So just educating even your own technology teams is an interesting exercise. So you need to make the investment to be online all the time. And then also, what we can do with the clearinghouse, and as Jim said, what we do collaboratively is figure out the framework so we can deal with getting ahead of the fraud and the scammers, and having a liability framework and the fraud operations that are comparable to the protections you get right now with the card transactions, because we've seen all the publicity about Zelle scams, and we certainly don't want to go big with RFP without having figured out how we handle that and how we get in front of that. And I think before this explosive growth can happen, those investments in the infrastructure need to be made as well. So there's an investment part here, but I think the ability to price for value and just the customer delight is absolutely going to be what the winning value proposition is.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the title company, because we're in the process of buying it. My wife literally this morning was going, I have to do all this for a wire, and what's this number, how do I spell this?
And she had to go to the branch, probably, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there we go, I think we got a new one. But so we get the business case, but then that leads to, I think you've stressed it, and actually all of you have stressed it in your comments. Therefore, there's operational challenges. There's a lot of questions that have to be asked, a lot of education. And Jim, how do you then help financial institutions and billers understand, address, and ease kind of their way through what they perceive as the operational challenges?
Well, as I mentioned before, we have a lot of experience that we've taken away from onboarding as many customers, as many banks as we have, from seeing how use cases operate. And we've gotten an incredible depth of understanding that we can help banks walk through. And many of them are different. Every bank's got a different portfolio of customers, a different set of priorities that they're going after. And we can help them identify different areas in their journey. If it's a heavy retail-oriented bank, we have consumer applications which is where they may want to start. If it's a treasury management bank, then we've got some areas where they can start there. But we have a lot of experience that we can share, lessons learned in terms of what they should do and what they shouldn't do, to be perfectly honest with you. When they're designing their user experience, which is the one thing we probably don't pay enough attention to, making sure that the user experience is correct. You talked about security before. One thing that I don't think gets enough attention is the fact that all the RTP transactions come through secure bank channels. They're originated through the most secure channels around right now, right? So you've got to make sure that the experience is appropriate to a real-time payment. These are final. These are irrevocable. They can be recalled, right? So you've got to make sure that you're designing your front end in a way that avoids possible duplications of transactions, those kind of things. Because you can't just recall them when somebody makes a mistake, right? So all of those things need to be taken into consideration on the design side. And it's the experience that we bring to the table in terms of onboarding banks. And even with some of our more experienced banks, we deal with them on a day-to-day basis as they're rolling out more use cases and pick up as many lessons as we possibly can. But our job is to syndicate around all of those best practices and make sure people are using the network to the best of their ability.
And then maybe Jessica and Tim, for you guys, we talked then sort of business, we talked operations. What about things from the technology side?
Sure, I mean, actually, I think the technology of simplifying is always, more challenging than it seems, but I still think a lot of the challenge is more on the education and awareness side, right? I mean, right now you've got 270 financial institutions that have enabled real-time payments and direct to customers, even if they're not originating their customers can receive payments. A lot of that happens silently, and they're not taking any credit for it, making customers aware that this goodness is happening, right? I think there's an opportunity there, right? I think once we start using RFPs, that's going to be another education and awareness program, right? So, I mean, the first time a consumer gets an RFP, you want them to not question what to do with it, right? So I think we got to get out in front of that with awareness and education. And then as we talk to our clients, you go to a merchant or a biller. I mean, Jessica, you mentioned it. I mean, you have to, I don't know, we call it RTP, but it's more than RTP. Maybe it's Smarter Payment Network. Maybe that's what it should be. Maybe that's what it should be, SPN. Oh, there you go. Have that royalty free there, too.
I like precision payments. That's the one that I
okay, good. Yeah. But, there's a lot of education with the billers about what's the value proposition, right? So, this stuff takes time, but I think education and awareness and, keeping fraud rates down. I think we've done a great job. Let's celebrate the success, make people aware of that.
I'd add two things to that from a technology perspective. One, on the fraud side of this, we hear this all the time, because it kind of gets back to what Jim was saying too. Can we provide a technology or integrate to a technology that provides payee verification? And that is probably the next challenge we need to seriously solve for. That'll take a lot of that angst out of that workflow. On the security end of things, I just remind people, everybody that talks about RTP has this question about security next. And I think people just kind of forget that the basics apply to RTP too, right? Every single one of those transactions can still be fraud checked. They need to be validated against, sanctions screening. It's not, just because they're faster doesn't mean that, you throw out all the basics out the window. I think there's also another layer there that needs to be investigated a little bit more on the end of insider fraud, right? That's another area that people it's again, table stakes when people think about it, but for RTP, because of the finality of this, and without payee verification, you really do want to take a look at insider fraud. But I think the other technology component of all of this this is kind of calling out the elephant in the room, but is interoperability and network reach. That's what every single one of my bank's customers have said to them and to us. We'll use real-time payments much more earnestly when we can reach more people, right? It's kind of a chicken and egg situation, I get that, but we do need to figure out how to connect all of our disparate solutions in this area so that the industry in general benefits from all this great work that we've been doing.
Well, and I think, so hearing about, we gotta do education, we gotta do communication, we have to focus on the basics. I think the other part is collaboration as well. And so, just a question for any of you, how can we best improve collaboration? Because it does feel that it's not just one voice, it needs to be 3-4 voices from different perspectives, kind of being on message and showing the value that works for everyone that's going to be important here.
I mean, I think the clearinghouse is doing a great job in setting up the right forums and the right governance to enable that collaboration to address some thorny issues such as liability framework for request for payment. That really will serve the industry as a foundation to have a very strong network in place. I believe where there is, what's going to be interesting to see how it plays out is really with FedNow coming online and RTP being live, how do we make sure that collaboration happens between the networks, because we have a lot of the same banks invested in both, but we don't really have those working groups that really are working hard towards interoperability. So to come back to interoperability, I think it's going to be a business opportunity, frankly, for banks to say this, never mind, dear customer, whether it's RTP or FedNow, it's just an instant payment, and if it comes in from one rail, we'll make sure the recipient gets it on whatever rail they've enabled, but that shouldn't have to be the case.
Yeah, I say that's something we work on all the time. I mean, I agree, that's the state of the state right now, but, on the other side of our business in the merchant world, there's not a fair amount of interoperability between some of those rails, so it would be great if we could make that come together. In the meantime, we have to take that complexity away from the user experience, right? And so, again, it's how you build in simplicity to when something underneath is maybe all that simple.
So I would say that the interoperability question starts to get really complicated when you get down to the technical details. Doing instantaneous settlement across multiple networks isn't easy, right? And that's part of the challenge. There is a technical challenge that needs to be addressed, and we're working on it. We'll get there at some point in time. But you take a look at that through a legacy frame, which is how do we do ACH interoperability? Well, at the end of the day, we swap files. Well, you're not doing that in a real-time environment. You've got to settle every single transaction as it goes through the network instantaneously. So there's a little bit more complexity when we talk about that. But leaving that on the side for a moment, what we do need is transparency. What we do need is working together on some of the thorny problems like what Ricky was talking about, so that we don't have different solutions to the same problem. If we can get there, I think we go a long way, and I think we'll solve the interoperability problem somewhere down the road. But I think if we are transparent, and I think we've done a good job with our colleagues in terms of sharing message specifications and the like, and we put as much as we possibly can on our website. Because we want the designs to be as compatible as possible, so it doesn't require a lot of different work by the banks and the technology providers while we work on that thornier question of interoperability. But I do think transparency and working for organizations like the FTC, organizations that are working for like common good as well as faster payments, using those forums where we can is a good way to kind of help us get to that common experience.
Yeah, if we can make interoperability not like electrical outlets around the world.
would help.
That'd be a good thing. Got about 90 seconds left, so let's do a quick sort of look into the future. Maybe just I'll start with you, but your thoughts on, what the next 12 to 18 months look like in this space?
That's an interesting question. I thought about this. One of the things that my company used to tackle next, and you brought this up, high volume originators. We want to send you a batch of RTP payments. They don't really want to do that, but I understand what the business problem is that they're trying to solve, and we need to figure out a way to make that simple for them. We figured out other payment types to make it simple. We need to do that now. I think you're also going to see more requests for integrations into ERP systems directly, more requests to integrate with payroll systems directly. So we talk about open banking. That's going to open up another whole aspect of direct integrations. I really think that's where we're headed.
So from my standpoint, one of the most exciting things we're working on right now is immediate cross-border payments, right? It is the holy grail of payments. That's what folks have wanted for years, and we are now, we've done a proof of concept last year. We are actually going to be piloting a cross-border program with payments settling between the US and the EU in seconds. We proved conceptually it can be done, and I think the model that we have in place provides probably the most exciting thing that this business has seen from a payment standpoint in a very long time. And that's going to be coming to market next year. So we're really looking forward to that, and I think that's an exciting thing that will be very welcomed by the banking community as well as the business community.
I would say request for payment, and especially to your point about the receiving banks, as the retail banks and the hotel banks of these large organizations that we represent come together and embrace request for payment. This has the potential to really take off. So I look forward once we have the framework in place, and then we'll have the crawl, walk, run model, but I hope we get to run much faster than anticipated.
Let's do it.
Tim?
Yeah, I think those are some great answers. I think making RFP a reality and weaving that into the customer experience is good. When I think cross-border, that's been something that's in need of a solution for a very long time. So I'm, deeply hopeful this is it, and optimistic. And the other one we think about is how do we continue to make this simpler for the customer. Right? I mean, today we talk about interoperability on the back end, but for our, even a consumer experience, we know it's not very interoperable on the front end. It's like I got to go here to transfer, and here to pay a bill, and here to send money to another person. It's not an integrated payment experience, and that's harder than it sounds. But I think if we can create that integrated payment experience, who you want to pay, how much, and when, and we can fold RFPs into that. Like your RFP shows up, I don't care if it's an RFP for a bill payer, another person, whatever. That, to me, creates a huge win for our customers and for us. I don't know if that happens within 18 months, but that's something we're certainly hard working on the next 18 months.
Excellent. Well, a lot we said here. Keep it simple. Focus on creating a great experience. Focus on educating and collaborating so that we can increase adoption and fundamentally create the focus on doing interoperability the right way. And we'll continue to see some great progression in RTP. So, Jessica, Jim, Ulrike, Tim, thank you very much for your insight and comments today. And everyone enjoy the rest of the conference.